Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
Hello, everybody. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guests may not represent those of the host of the station. Folks, I can't believe it's June, and I have two public service announcements. One is June is Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, and if anyone listens to me long enough, you know that I talk about Alzheimer's and brain awareness all year long. And the second announcement is June is also Gay Pride Month, and I want everyone in the LGBTQ plus community to know if they are looking for a support group, they are a caregiver, you are welcome to my support group, #KICK, Alzheimer's Ass Movement on Facebook. Alzheimer's doesn't discriminate, and neither do I. And that's my public service announcements. Folks, I am so honored and blessed to have with me my very special guest, a dear, lovely person who I love and admire. Welcome. Multi-talented. Thank you. I have with me today Cherie Kerr. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Cherie.
Yes, you are. Very few people do, but thank you.
You're welcome. CEO of Cherie Kerr Public Relations. She is author of Charlie's Notes, a memoir. She is also creator, founder, and artistic director for Orange County Crazies. Cherie is a writer, performer, and director, a founding member of the world-famous LA Groundlings. There, I got it out. Very busy lady. She also wrote two other books, Death by PowerPoint, How to Avoid Killing Your Presentation and Sucking the Life Out of Your Audience. And the second book, I've asked Miller to say a few words. Those are available on Amazon.com. And Cherie also has a business called Execuprops. I hope I'm saying that name correctly. So I want to welcome Cherie Kerr to Chatting with Betsy. Welcome, Cherie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Betsy.
Oh, my privilege, and I'm so glad you were able to come on my show because I know you're extremely busy. Cherie, I loved your book, Charlie's Notes, and I want to tell the audience, this book, you will laugh, you will cry. It is so heart-touching. You go in such detail about your family. It's very touching, and I'm into book covers. And on your book cover, your dad, by the way, is a very handsome man and a good-looking as a child. Mm-hmm. You have the music notes. You have a picture of your dad as a young boy holding his violin.
Violin, correct.
And a picture of him when he's older. And I just love it. And I'm going to ask you what I ask all my authors, and that is, what motivated you to write Charlie's Notes?
Well, it's kind of a long story. A very close friend of mine, Gus Lee, I don't know if you know Gus, he's the author of China Boy. And he wanted his family migrated to San Francisco from China, and he wanted them to know the family history. And he was actually a businessman. He's a lawyer and was worked for the State Bar of California. But he felt compelled to write this book about the migration of his family so his children would know their history, because it was very unique. And it turned out to be a bestseller. It's one of the best-selling books, I guess, on the top 100 list of great American pieces of literature. So we're good friends, and he knew about my father, that my father had a pretty interesting life, and that my background was mixed as well. I was half Italian and my mother Scotch and English, and said, you ought to do something like that, at some point. And then my father had kept a notebook of all the famous people he worked with in films, private parties where he played the upright string bass ultimately, after the violin and then the guitar and then the string bass. And he would take notes, and he had this little diary of dates and when he played with them and different things that happened. And he said someday I want to write a book about all this. And as he prepared to possibly get going on that, he was stricken with Alzheimer's, and he was never able to write the book. And I thought, I've got to tell this story because it's a kind of an Angela's Ashes kind of piece, and I was learning more about my grandparents on his side, and just the whole family and the dynamic and his rise to being a prominent musician and all. And I thought, somebody's got to tell this story, and he's not going to now, so I have to take up the charge. So I think it was that, coupled with the fact that he was so precious to me, and I was losing him, and it was a long 8-year battle with Alzheimer's, which is very painful, as you know, Betsy. And it was my way to grieve. It was my way to mourn, losing a piece of him every week, pretty much, to the point where he really didn't know who I was at the end. So it was cathartic, and it was therapeutic, and I just thought it was a great story. And my goal is to be able to make it into a film eventually, but it being a period piece is very expensive to do. But I think it's a great story too. If I wasn't related to Charlie, I still think it would have been a good story. And thanks for your kind words about it. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. It is a great story. Cherie, one of my many passions is to make sure people know that Alzheimer's is real. It's not just memory loss. I think we need to personalize it, putting a face and a name out there. Mm-hmm. And your book does that. Your book honors your dad's memory. And actually, I'm going to get verklempt. I like to dedicate this show to your dad.
Oh, thank you. He would be so honored. Thank you.
It is really a phenomenal story. Your dad grew up in pretty poor.
Yeah.
We read the book like a long time ago, and his parents came from Italy, and except your mom didn't. Your mom didn't come from Italy?
No, my mom.
Your grandparents. That's what I'm getting confused.
From Canada. Yeah, they were. What? My grandmother on my mother's side was from Aberdeen, Scotland, and my grandfather on my mother's side was from Sheffield, England, and they migrated to Canada, to Niagara Falls, Canada. And my father was from the Niagara Falls, American side of the falls.
And just to read how your dad's family struggled, it's a great period piece for people to even learn, American history. Yeah. And I also feel that your dad rise to fame was slow, but he got there. And I want people to know just how talented your dad was. I mean, he partied with Judy Garland, if I remember. Mm-hmm.
Lucy, Frank Sinatra.
Yes, Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz. I read the book a while ago.
I know, my mind goes. It's been a while.
Blank sometimes.
Global. I mean, he had so many wonderful stories. Some of the names that many of your listeners may not know, but Sonia Henney, she was a famous figure skater, if you remember.
Yes.
Howard Hughes, I know he played a party at his house. There was, a lot of famous people in the 50s and 60s mostly and that was the era when he was doing a lot of private parties and films. And we would have such a blast on Sunday morning. Those were obviously on Saturday nights mostly. And Sunday morning at the kitchen table was my mother and my sister and I sitting there listening to my dad kind of run down the evening. Of course, it was all done in strict confidence. We were not to talk about anything. That he told us about the parties, but it was so much fun, and we just couldn't wait.
I think it was kind of, I see humor. I have a sense of dark humor for some. Mm-hmm. It comes with so many years of caregiving. That's your grandmother.
Your go-to for sanity.
Yes.
Keep a sense of humor. Absolutely.
Yes, definitely. Your dad's mom knew that your dad, Charlie, was very talented and was hoping that he would support her in her older years, and she was mad when your dad got married.
Yes, and then when he moved to the West Coast, that was it. I mean, she lost it. She totally lost it. But she had, interestingly, Francesca was her name, Francesca Ferraro. She had come from Mount Vesuvius area, the Naples area. Her father was a milliner, and he also made original shoes, and they were just gorgeous. And her whole family was doctors and teachers and very prominent, but she thought she was going to have a better life if she came to America. And so her brother had done that, and she just decided to set sail with a family friend and come here and find a really rich husband and live like Mary Astor. But it never turned out that way. It was really quite sad. And she was, had a lot of kids and constantly pregnant, and they didn't have any money. My grandfather, I think, if you recall, owned a little tailor shop that was so modest. Beautiful clothes, beautiful fabrics, but the floor was made of dirt. They didn't even have anything for the floor, honestly. So really interesting story about, the American dream. And what's interesting about the book, at least I think about the story, is it's not a book about a famous person who's a household name, that you would know and read about. It's a story about just human life and how people have that dream and how they come and to America, or they do whatever they do, and they get there partially. They never make it huge, but they still have great talent, and they still have a lot to share, and they still have a pretty interesting life because of it. And that was my dad. I think he was on the crest of fame, but a lot of things precluded that from happening along the way. But yes, he was incredibly gifted. He was not only a great musician, he could have gone on to be a really good actor. He certainly had the looks and the charm, and he was funny. He was one of the funniest people I have ever known. He just loved to be silly and have fun, and there was always that vibe of humor and music and love in our house. So I'm very grateful.
It is a beautiful story, and I like how you wrote about your dad's family history, because people nowadays the young people nowadays don't realize the struggles that people faced, coming here, working hard to get everything that they, needed or wanted, and how their children had to work for what they had. And abuse was very common but not talked about. And your poor aunt, who got
Aunt Mary.
Yes, who got abused, awful, that I felt so bad for your aunt. And
I know, I did too. I loved her. She was kooky, and she was a little offbeat. I mean, everybody made fun of her as you read the book and tried to make her think she was insane and everything. But she was brilliant. In fact, it was my Aunt Mary who sat with me for 3 days with a videotape recorder and gave me all the history. She knew dates and times and events and details of things that happened in the family. So she gave me a lot of the background for the book. And then my Uncle Joe, who was also a brilliant musician and an artist who you read about in the book, he and his wife also gave me a lot of notes. So all the siblings except for Jenny and Ida, the younger ones, gave me all the blanks to fill in the childhood, and it was interesting. But when the book was finished, my Aunt Ida wouldn't speak to me for several years because she was very upset at how I portrayed my grandmother in the book, and I kept trying to explain to her, this is not fictive. I didn't make this up. These are from notes that I was given from family, and I had to trust that obviously they were telling me the truth. So sometimes I want to caution everyone, and I know Gus Lee went through that a little bit too on his book. You have to be careful how you write these family stories, because inevitably somebody's going to get upset, or they're going to see it, differently.
Yes, they will get upset, and it's really funny in a way, because if you have 4 children in a family, like say my family, there was
right.
4 children. Each one sees our mother or father in a different way.
Oh yeah, exactly. I think all of us have a different experience of our siblings and our parents, as we're growing up. And my I know in our family, my father, I was just enamored by his talent and his humor and everything. So, and I clashed with my mother as a kid, but when I got older, I came into my mother. She was my hero at the end of the day. But I think everyone who, again, like you say, grows up with someone, you really do have a different point of view than others might. And I don't think Jenny and Ida were the younger siblings in the family, and I don't think they went through as much as the older siblings did. They saw things very differently. So,
yes.
And again, I went from their notes. I went from everybody I could interview that mostly in the family, and then those who kind of knew them peripherally through music or whatever, to get the story, because I knew a lot of it, but I didn't know all of it. And that was something else that I thought was so fun to do. And it took me, as I said, 8 years to write that book, but I wasn't doing it every day. I would work weekends and nights on it. But you don't really begin to appreciate the sacrifices that your ancestors made to come here and to start a life here. And I'm just eternally grateful, to all of them for having migrated, I guess, to the United States and made my life and my success possible. And I think it's a good exercise for everyone to do, to reach back and take a look at where they came from.
Yes, that's true. I used to tell my grandmother, she would tell me stories of fleeing Europe, and I said, "Oh, Grandma, too bad, your story would make a great movie, a great love
right.
novel."
Sure.
Yes, definitely, for sure. What would you like the audience to know and to remember about your dad? I know he was talented, handsome. He was a great father, great husband. What else would you like them to know?
Yeah, he just he cared so much about peace in the world. He cared about people being able to reach their potential artistically. And he was just a kind, gentle soul. I mean, truly the persona of an artiste, somebody who had no patience for fighting or arguing or war or anything. He just wanted to create. He wanted to be around creative people and I think make a difference. He cared a lot about animals. He loved babies and little kids. He was just a very gentle soul and somebody I think I observed a lot, just his whole gentle approach. He was the most gentle person I think I've ever known, and not in an effeminate way. It was just a certain grace about him that fascinated me.
I feel through your story, Cherie, that your dad, even when he was famous, he was humble. He was grounded. He still, it must have been tough on your parents' marriage, your dad traveling, and they, stayed together. And he was, the story, how you wrote about your dad, I felt that he was a very humble man and always helping people, giving people a break, helping people connect to other people, and very generous man. And I just, that's how I perceived your dad.
Picture. Yeah, he was very much that way. In fact, I think in being in show business, in that world, in the music world or whatever, the one thing that I think he was lacking, not as a criticism of him, but that he didn't have the drive or the claw your way to the top personality, to really reach huge heights. He was always more about stepping aside, as you say, and helping to lift, some struggling musician or somebody he was teaching or around. And sometimes the lack of drive to really push super hard leaves a lot of great artists like my dad sort of in the wings. And I wish that he had pushed a little harder, but that really wasn't important to him. What was important to him was his music more than anything, and his family. And I think that was just a really good lesson for me.
Yes.
To say, this is how you live your life. If you're lucky enough to get the kind of breaks that a lot of people do, like one of his great friends from the Falls, Tommy Tedesco, just a huge studio musician. He's on every soundtrack for every television and film thing, I think, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. Great family friend, a wonderful guy. He's no longer with us, but my dad gave him his first job when he came from the Falls to L.A., in his music store to teach guitar lessons. And then Tommy went on to become a highly paid, highly regarded studio musician. And my dad was every bit as good as he was, but Tommy had the drive. He had knew how to work his way into the system, if you will. And he was very grateful always to my father, very kind to all of us. In fact, I used to write lyrics for Tommy. But yeah, my dad was more about kindness than stardom. And again, that's a very humbling lesson to take with you, for me to realize it's not about the fame, it's more about the journey and what you do.
Yes, and your dad, it took a long time for your dad to become well-known and famous. And the fact that it didn't, get to his head, and, I feel that he raised you and your sister still in like a very humble way.
Mm-hmm.
He
did.
Not to think that you were better, than the other people.
Exactly. And that stems from when they came here, of course, they lived in very meager housing and so on. And even when he went to high school, he went to a Catholic high school, he was the only what you would call immigrant, alien child in that school. Everybody else was very Irish, Scotch, Anglo type, and he was the only Italian that attended that school. And I think sometimes, and I don't know, maybe it's just in that era, but you see it all over even today from people coming from other countries. There's something that you're instilled with in terms of humility, to realize that even if you go beyond the watermark of where you want to be, you never look down on the little guy when you come from a place, a childhood like Charlie. I don't think he ever forgot his roots or left them aside and thought, well, that doesn't mean anything anymore. I think he always remembered what it was like to be bullied in school. Just kind of passed over. There was one chapter in the book that is one of my favorites, where he invited somebody to go to the ball, it was called, but it's like our prom or something, and then he went to go pick her up, and when her father came to the door to let my dad in and realized he was Italian, he wouldn't let his daughter go to the ball with him. And then in the book, he went back to the house, and everybody was upset, and it's a very tender part of the book. It'd make a beautiful scene in a film. But I think he was very aware of how blessed he was to be in certain circles where there was no prejudice, there was no bigotry. We didn't have that in our house. That's why when we talk about racism and things like that today, that's so alien to me, because even growing up as a kid in the late 40s, early 50s, we didn't have that in our house. We had musicians there jamming every Sunday. People bring a potluck, and everybody came from every ethnicity you could think of. Great musicians. to jam together. So I think that was really important to him, that he was aware that existed, but that he, would never have thought, well, I'm lucky now. I've made it to a certain plateau. I mean, he was never really famous, but he was well regarded by other musicians in the jazz industry, especially. But that he never took that for granted, or he always appreciated what it was like for a kid who couldn't speak English. As you know, my dad couldn't for a long time in school. So I think that's something that always impressed me about him, was that he had great reverence for his family and where they came from, and the fact that they didn't have what other kids had, but they always welcomed people along the way that came from indigent backgrounds as well. And that really stuck with me.
Oh, that's beautiful. I remember that chapter, and your dad, being bullied, the prejudice. Can you tell the audience what your dad's original name is? He Americanized it to Charlie, but
yes, yeah, his real name was Carluchi DePietro, and then he changed his name to Charlie. All the kids changed their. They all had different Italian names, and they changed them all to English names. Giuseppe became Joseph. Luigi became Louis. And Maria Conchetta, that's my aunt who I absolutely adored, the one who was so abused, she changed her name to Mary. So, again, trying so hard to be American, making sure they fit in. So they all changed their names. And it was like a big deal in that house. They all got real excited when Eugene, my grandfather, Eugenio was his name, decided they were all going to have American names. And I remember Mary telling me that story, and it was very poignant to me.
Yes, that's what they did, especially when they came off onto Ellis Island. They changed people's names, sometimes to fit their occupation or the area they were from.
Right.
Cherie, I know you're pressed for time, and I just want to thank you for coming on Chatting with Betsy. Your dad's pleasure. Life is amazing. I want people to know, here was a man, talented, a wonderful man, talented, and into music, and Alzheimer's, unfortunately, struck him, and he was placed in care, and sometimes we do have to place our loved ones in care, and that is okay. I want people to know that is okay. We can't always take care of our loved ones at home. No. And Alzheimer's, it doesn't discriminate who you are, what you are, and we need to personalize this disease. I want to encourage the audience, get this book. It's a long book. It's powerful. It is so intense and raw, and it's real. It's a real, just inspiring, emotional book, and I highly recommend it. I loved reading the book, and
I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
It was great. I'm so glad that I met you.
And thank you. You are so terrific, and it's such a bright light, I think, probably for everyone. I know you sure are for me, and I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'd love to have you come on again maybe sometime next year and talk about your business, because you are just like, folks, she's amazingly talented. Google Cherie, Sherie, Kerr, Kerr. Google Cherie and just see how amazing she is and how talented she is.
Thanks, Betsy.
Because you are, and I want to thank you for taking the time of your busy day to spend with me. I appreciate it so much.
Oh, thank you, Betsy. Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure, and letting me talk about that book. It's I miss my dad every day, and my mom too, and it's just wonderful to have something of him still with me, and that's how I feel about the book.
Yes, and it's really it's an honor. It's honoring your dad's life. And the name of the book, folks, is Charlie's Notes, a Memoir, a True American Story. And I really recommend that. And you know what, Cherie, I tell folks, we always will love and miss our loved ones. Always.
And, there is a website, too, Betsy, for the book, charliesnotes.com.
Sure.
People want to read an excerpt or anything else about it before they purchase a book, they can certainly go read a little bit about it, too, if you don't mind my mentioning that.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I have it down here, but I forgot. So
that's okay. That's okay.
Thank you so much. Oh, what a pleasure. Good luck with everything that you do, and definitely we'll have to make an appointment for next year. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you again, Cherie.
You're
Kerr.
welcome, Betsy, and thank you so much for all you do and also the attention that you bring to Alzheimer's. You're absolutely right. It's so important. It's a very demanding thing on any caregivers, whether your loved one is in a home or at home with you, which is almost impossible to care for someone like that. They need 24-hour care. And it's a very hard thing to watch, as we both know, somebody who is so vibrant and vital and then gradually diminish. It's a very hard thing to do, and people do need support, and they do need to hang together, and we all need to contribute to research so we can see if we can stop this crazy thing.
Yes, I totally agree. Well, thank you, Cherie. I say it takes a village to support a caregiver.
Yes.
It takes a team, and I highly recommend for people to plan in advance and find a team to help support you as you take care of your loved one.
Right.
And it's okay to ask for help.
Absolutely.
It's okay. We can't do it alone.
No, and we also need to get somebody to fill up our tank, too, and someone to be there to talk to and help us process that sadness that you go through when suddenly you go to your loved one and they look at you with this vapid look because they don't know who you are, when for your whole life you remember how adoringly they looked at you. Those things are really hard to deal with, and I think we all need some kind of counseling or support group or something to wade our way through that tough time, because it is very hard.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, Cherie. I always highly recommend counseling. Talk to your, recommend the audience, talk to your healthcare provider. Mm-hmm. It's okay to need help. It's okay to say, I can't deal with this. I need someone to talk to. I am not ashamed to say I had counseling midway through Matt's journey, and I have counseling now. And, we need it. A lot of people at some point in their life need counseling, and let's embrace that. Let's embrace the help that's out there.
Right.
Because it is difficult. It's very difficult. It's, in my opinion, well, I haven't had to deal with other diseases, but it's the most heart-wrenching disease.
It truly is, because it just first of all, for most people who have it, it's a long journey from diagnosis to when they finally succumb. So the agony of watching somebody literally deteriorate before your eyes day after day, that's hard, I think, on the human spirit. And my mother died of cancer, and rather quickly from diagnosis. It was a 6-month diagnosis, and then she passed away, which was shocking and just horrific. But it was a lot easier than to watch my father just waste away, and especially, as you said, when it's somebody who's so gifted and so talented, and then they don't even remember what a string bass is, let alone to play it. That's hard. That's hard to watch.
Yes, it is. I'll never forget the last time I saw my dad. My dad also had Alzheimer's. He didn't remember his family. He didn't remember his 4 children, but yet Alzheimer's baffles me. He remembered his childhood dog. Go figure this disease out.
Sure, that's what happens. They have that long-term memory kind of thing. There's some things that, and they come and go, I mean, my dad would some days be almost lucid, and then within a couple sentences, he wasn't even making sense. So, as I said, I have great empathy for you and all of us out there who've had to deal with that horrible demise of a loved one, because it's really hard on the soul. You don't want to see them suffer. You don't want to have them live in agony. And I guess the only redeeming factor is that they really don't know, and we do. And I think that at least we can say, well, I'm not so sure they suffered so badly because they really weren't quite aware that they were. And that's what I cling to. I think of that often and think, well, I guess it's us that really have to bear the burden and the sadness and all that kind of thing. But they don't know, maybe, and maybe that's good. Maybe that's just fine.
Yes. I think when they get past a certain point, I know my mother-in-law knew she couldn't do things. Matt knew, but once they reach that point of they don't remember that, for me, it was easier yet sad at the same time, because I was glad they no longer were miserable, that they remembered that they forgot how to do everything, because now they don't remember that. It's really
it's a very complicated dynamic, isn't it? But
yes. My neurologist said it even baffles them. They can't figure it out.
Sure.
It's just it is. The brain is fascinating, and it's full of mystery. I call it the last frontier, like Alaska was.
Yeah,
it's
no
just,
kidding.
Well,
I'm hopeful that they're making advances in preventing or dealing with it or slowing it down, the progression of it or whatever. But I think it's people like you, which is so terrific. You keep, the requests so live and present so that people will be aware of it at all times and do what they can, whether it's to help out at a center or donate some money, whatever any of us can do. That's maybe going to get us there where we need to be.
Yes, they're doing a lot of research, and I hope a lot of clinical trials, and I hope something comes through for my son's generation. My son is at high risk, so I hope there's going to be something, God forbid, if he should get it.
Well, we hope not.
Yeah, I hope so. But thank you, Cherie.
You're welcome,
Kerr.
Betsy. Thank you so much for having me on. I very much enjoyed it, and I'd come back anytime. You just let me know.
Okay, thank you, Cherie.
Okay, take care.
Take care.
All right.
Folks.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Folks, if you missed any of this podcast, you can catch it all over again wherever you hear your favorite podcast. It is free to subscribe to Chatting with Betsy. I'm on Spotify, Spreaker, Apple, Google, just to name a few. And I want to thank Jeannie White, station manager at Passion World Talk Radio, who writes the blog, produces the show. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passion World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And thank you, the listeners, for listening. Thank you for sharing. Please share to help other people. And as I always say, in a world where you can be anything, to please be kind. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host, Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye now.
Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are two women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager, at THECONNECTSHOW@gmail.com for a podcast show details. Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the Internet.